Welcome into your Buccaneer podcast here on Pewter Pirates.com. We call it a Few Extra Bucs. And you know what? I'm kind of hungry, so I'm going to eat a bunch of crow because I was dead wrong about your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I thought they'd go out to L.A. and get slaughtered by one of the best teams in the NFL. But, boy, the Bucs did the slaughtering, putting up the points on offense, getting it done when they had to on defense. I bring in Justin Thomas. I bring in my partner, Roy Cummings. First, Justin Thomas. I was surprised. I was wrong. You know what? On this podcast, when I'm wrong, I'll admit it. How surprised were you?
Well, I knew it would be a close game, and it actually wound up being pretty close up until the strip sack fumble for the touchdown. But I still was impressed that the Bucs hung in there and actually was the ones doing the whooping. I kind of thought the Rams would pull it off in the end. So it was a very impressive win overall for the Bucs. You have to say that.
All right, Roy Cummings, I'll bring you in. You're usually Mr. Optimistic, and I'm usually kind of not Debbie Downer, but I don't know what I am, but I'm more negative, I guess. Roy Cummings, how surprised were you? Come on, you were a little surprised by that, weren't you?
Hey, the only thing I got right was that the fact that it was a close game. I mean, other than that, I certainly didn't expect the Bucs to put up 50 points, have to put up 50 points. I could see the Rams putting up what they put up, but I didn't expect the Bucs to end up on top no matter what. I thought the Rams, but I also thought that the Rams were vulnerable because I think Jared Goff can be rattled, and the way the Bucs have been playing defense, I thought they could rattle him a little bit, but I also thought that they would probably correct some things in the secondary, which they clearly did not do. There were a couple things that happened that I expected, but I certainly didn't expect that outcome. But you know what? It just goes to show you that, the Bucs may be a little bit better than we thought originally. I wouldn't get too excited just yet, but it shows that they've got the potential to do something potentially special this year.
I think 2-2 is a good record for them because, they could have made the field goal and won that game, but they very easily could have lost against the Carolina Panthers. So I think 2-2 is a good record for them. They have the New Orleans Saints coming up. We're going to preview that game in just a bit. But Jameis Winston is your NFC Offensive Player of the Week. Jameis Winston was at his press conference this week. I asked him a question. You haven't been around Bruce Arians a whole bunch yet, but what have you taken from him in a positive way that's really helped your game? And he immediately looked at me and he said, dialogue. The dialogue I have with him in between plays on the sideline, you know what I translated that as, Roy, is – he's getting on him in a constructive way. I think Jameis Winston needs that kind of coach. Yeah, he can handle the Jimbo Fisher of Florida State who gets on him, but he needs not only Bruce Arians' dialogue, but he always harkens back to this, that Byron Leftwich, his offensive coordinator, played the game. And that's something he hasn't had in his ear. So you combine that with Bruce Arians, we're really seeing the effects of this new coaching staff with Jameis Winston right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. What I like, and I think what Jameis Winston likes, is the fact that he doesn't mind being coached hard. You're right about that, but I think he's beyond the point where he knows what his mistakes and what his failings are. He knows the areas he's got to get better in. We all know that. So it's not like screaming at him or yelling at him is going to change anything at this point. It's not a matter of work ethic with him. It's really just a matter of how does he envision his role as the quarterback. And how does he envision his role within the team? Is he the guy who thinks he's got to take it all on his shoulders still? I think that's what he's learning, is that if he's going to be better for this team if he just goes out and plays his game to the best of his ability. And I think they've made some adjustments in the way they do things with Jameis Winston that are helping him out. We can get into that a little bit. But, I think the biggest thing that's changed is that I think he's begun to realize that he's better off and the Bucs are better off if he just plays a good, solid, steady game. He doesn't have to be the superhero playmaker that he always thought he had to be in the past. That I think he realizes now that if the running game isn't there and the defense isn't there, he's not going to make it better by trying to make some splash play that isn't there for either. And I think he's figured that out.
One more question before we get to the New Orleans Saints. Having a win like that after such a heartbreaking loss against the Giants to begin a road trip that is NFL unfriendly and unfair and ridiculous, that's a whole nother podcast. Starting a road trip like they have in that way, I think if they beat the New Orleans Saints, Roy, Bruce Arians, the master motivator he is, will say, you know what, boys? This is an us against the world thing. They put us in this predicament, and we're going to tear it up on the road and come back and be studs when we get home and have control of a lot of things. And they can do that with the win over the Saints this week.
I think you're absolutely right. There isn't another sport there's not another professional sport where they play the disrespect card or the nobody believes in you card more than football. In football, they do it all the time. Even the best teams. I mean, you saw Tom Brady a couple of years ago when the Patriots won the Super Bowl yet again, saying that nobody believed in us. Since when did nobody believe in the Patriots? But if the coaches get people to believe that, they do, and that motivates guys from inside the locker room. And I think the Bucs absolutely. I think they can be motivated by this. It's like this is a sign of disrespect. They don't believe in us. They don't think they think we're just some team that they can just throw this kind of a schedule at, and it's going to hurt. Well, we're going to show them it's not going to hurt. We're going to show them this is our strength, that we can take anything you throw at us, and we're going to win consistently. And if they do it against New Orleans, boy, there's no question, no telling what could come of this big, long road trip that a lot of people thought would be their undoing. Right now, it doesn't look like any undoing at all.
That's right, Roy. You know what? Let's talk about the New Orleans Saints. No Drew Brees. It's going to be Teddy Bridgewater. It's going to be Taysom Hill a little bit. And Bruce Arians, I asked him in the press conference about, facing a team without Drew Brees, and he immediately said both quarterbacks. He loves the Taysom Hill factor, and he appreciates how that will be hard to deal with. It's one thing to play a Saints team without Drew Brees. It's another to play maybe the most complete team in the Sean Payton era. A big reason they've won their last two games without Drew Brees is because the special teams has scored. It's because the defense has scored. I really believe the Bucs can win this game if they don't make the big mistake. I know you can say that about any game, but it's really true in this one because I think Jameis Winston is better than Teddy Bridgewater, and I think he has obviously more of an upside. He'll put up bigger numbers, but he can't make that mistake because you know what? Bridgewater won't make that mistake. Bridgewater won't wow you. He won't make the big mistake. So if the Bucs are mistake-free, I really think they have a shot in this game.
Yeah, I do too. And, timing is everything in sports. And the Bucs' timing, I think, going into this game is very good for them. Not only are they coming off a morale-boosting, confidence-boosting victory against the NFC champions, obviously, but now they go up and face the NFC runner-up on the road, and they do it after someone laid out the blueprint for them. Even though New Orleans won the game last week, Dallas laid out the blueprint of how to shut down the Saints offense. Look, the Saints under Teddy Bridgewater, I think a lot of people don't realize maybe, and you guys know this because you're so close to it, but it's basically the same offense. Drew Brees no longer has the arm to make that big play downfield. And they're not really asking Teddy Bridgewater to do that either. It's more try to, take the short stuff, pick teams apart, move down the field methodically and get yourself in a position. It worked just enough for him last week, but that's what they're doing now. But at the end of the day, you've got to take advantage of that. You've got to figure out a way that over the course of those 60, 70, 80-yard drives, you've got to force a team to get off the field and take the field goal at some point or punt. And the Cowboys figured it out. The Bucs have to figure that out as well because offensively, I think the Bucs certainly have the firepower. They showed it last week to put a big number up against New Orleans. New Orleans is pretty good defensively. You're right about the special teams, Mike. But I think this game comes down to can the Bucs shut down Teddy Bridgewater and the Saints offense? If they can do that, then I think they've got a shot at this game as well.
Devon White is going to be back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the defense really needs him. Kevin Minter's done a yeoman's job, but Devon White, they drafted him for a reason. They want him to be the leader on this defense. They want him to be the catalyst in the Todd Bowles scheme. I talked to Devon White in the locker room this week, and it's funny. He grew up in Louisiana, and he knows about the crowd noise. I guess he can help his teammates a little bit. But Devon White back against the Saints, so what will that mean for this defense, Roy?
I think it means a lot because he is the leader of this defense, really. I mean, that became the case in the preseason. He already had emerged as the leader. One of the things he was doing exceptionally well when he wasn't getting a lot of tackles and people were starting to wonder where is he was doing a good job of leading the defense. So I think he steps back into that role naturally. And what you just hope for is that, he can find his way defensively and not try to do too much. The plays are going to come to him. The position is set up and the scheme is set up for him to get a lot of work and a lot of tackles and be a focus. So he doesn't have to go out there and try to make plays. The plays will come to him. He just has to do the routine work. Go out and do what you're supposed to do every play. Follow your keys. Be in position. The plays will come to you. Make the tackles, and you'll be fine. So he adds another level of athleticism to a defense that is playing with a lot of athleticism, taking good advantage of it right now. I don't know that we'll see Devon White play 65 snaps. My guess is they probably give him most of the work, but I think the way Kevin Minter has played, which has been pretty good, I think he's earned the opportunity to split some time, at least for a week or two here. So that may happen, and so people shouldn't be surprised if that happens. But right now, as far as the Bucs are concerned, they've got two pretty good players there in Devon White and Kevin Minter. It's pretty hard to mess that up. So I'm anxious to see how Devon White looks, and anxious to see how the Bucs look with him and kind of running the show there.
All right, Justin, you know what time it is. Let's do it. More likely, baby. We're going to bring back Justin Thomas, our voice of reason, our producer, and our Buccaneer insider, Roy Cummings. These are three hypothetical questions. I'm always at an advantage because I know the friggin' questions. More likely, number one, guys, this is becoming, I think, maybe the most intriguing matchup every year, more and more in the NFC South, and it'll definitely be the biggest one to watch during this game. It's Mike Evans and Marshawn Lattimore. Lattimore's had his days against Mike Evans, and Mike Evans has had his days against Marshawn Lattimore. More likely, Justin Thomas, who has the bigger day and who wins the most battles, Marshawn Lattimore or Mike Evans. Sorry, Mike Evans.
I guess it depends on which Marshawn Lattimore shows up. If it's the one that played against DeAndre Hopkins earlier this year or the one that played against Amari Cooper. I don't know. There's so many factors in this. If the Saints defensive line can get to Jameis fast, that's going to factor a lot into the throws. I really think, though, the way Mike Evans seems to be playing this year, he's really been amazing, especially that third game versus the Giants. I think Mike Evans in the end will probably have the edge over Lattimore. I'm not saying he's going to have an insane game, but I could see him getting one touchdown and maybe in the 60-yard range, 70-yard range.
Nice. Roy Cummings, Marshawn Lattimore, Mike Evans, or Marshawn Lattimore?
This is a bit of a test game for Mike Evans because Marshawn Lattimore has obviously gotten Mike Evans off heel here a few times. He's gotten under his skin, forced him to take some bad penalties. That's a rivalry within a rivalry, and kind of a budding rivalry it is between the Bucs and Saints. I mean, the Bucs have dealt the Saints a couple of blows, in the last couple of years. Not enough to obviously knock them out of the playoffs necessarily, but they've caused them some trouble here, and so there's a bit of a rivalry going on. And that little rivalry within that rivalry, I think, is really something to watch out for. The thing is, Marshawn Lattimore can shut down Mike Evans, and as we found out last week, the Bucs will just turn to Chris Godwin or maybe Cameron Brate or O.J. Howard or maybe their running game and do that. So I'm not sure that just shutting down Mike Evans is good enough for the Saints. I think Mike Evans could have a big day and the Bucs could win, or he could have a small day and the Bucs could win. I think that's how dynamic the offense is. The Saints may have to think about putting Marshawn Lattimore over on Chris Godwin every once in a while. They may want to, mix that up a little bit with those coverages. So that's how good, Lattimore is. But that's also how good the Buccaneers' offense is and how many weapons they've got. You may not want to just have Lattimore facing up against one guy. They may have to switch that up if Chris Godwin starts to run away with the game the way he did last week.
Yeah, those are all great points. That's why you're the insider, my friend. When I look at this matchup, I always kind of go with the guy who's at home. The guy who's at home usually has the better game. That's why I think Marshawn Lattimore is going to have a better game. He's coming off a great game against the Dallas Cowboys where he put Amari Cooper in his place and really rebounded from some tough games early on. And I think Marshawn Lattimore, when he goes to Tampa, struggles a little bit. So I'm going to go with Marshawn Lattimore. Oh, I can't wait to bring this up with Roy. Our second more likely, first, Justin. I love this stat. I love this stat on Gerald McCoy. Last week for the Carolina Panthers, Christian McCaffrey, Roy, had more tackles than Gerald McCoy. But we'll get to you in just a second. Ndamukong Suh had a nice homecoming against the LA Rams. More likely, can we close the book on what was the better move now? Does it look like we can kind of say it was Suh or McCoy, or more likely is it too early for that? Justin.
I think you have to move on. Gerald McCoy's attitude, especially after he left, has kind of been disappointing. And then, as you pointed out, I haven't watched too many Panthers games, but I haven't heard his name mentioned too often. So I'm assuming he's not making that much of an impact. Whereas Suh has been great. And also, you got to add Shaq Barrett in there as well. Those are two great acquisitions that the Bucs got that are far outperforming Gerald McCoy. So, yeah, I think definitely everyone should move on. Suh has definitely already shown that was the better choice.
Roy Cummings, I know you're a big Gerald McCoy guy. Is it too soon to say the Bucs won in terms of making that move, or do you concede that Suh was the better guy? Is the better guy?
It's way too soon. Obviously, Ndamukong Suh's had a couple of big plays. One major one Sunday that helped seal a game for him. That's good, but the season's not over. It's way too soon. If you've got to watch the game with the defensive tackle to see, exactly what Gerald McCoy is doing. His job is not necessarily to get a bunch of tackles. A lot of times, depending on what the scheme is and what they're facing in terms of the offense, his job is just to take up two guys so other guys can make plays. It's easy to take one game, pull it aside, and say, "Oh, look who had more tackles than Gerald McCoy." That doesn't mean Gerald McCoy's not doing his job. The Panthers may be very happy with what he's doing. They may also be very disappointed in what he's doing. I just think it's too soon. I believe Ndamukong Suh was very motivated last week to go up against the Rams, who quit on him. Let's see what happens going forward. I think it's too soon. This is one that I will evaluate at the end of the season.
F. Lee Bailey. Gerald McCoy needs to hire you if he's ever in trouble, Roy Cummings. You are the F. Lee Bailey for Gerald McCoy. I'm pounding the fist. Ndamukong Suh, baby. It's Suh. It's not too soon to say Suh. Give me Ndamukong Suh, Gerald McCoy. You know what? I love the old dancing on the field when you South Carolina Panthers. Then the game rolls around. Oh, it's really a big deal. You know what? Just go away. And I don't even think you should be in the Ring of Honor. But we've debated that a little bit too. All right. More likely, number 3. Jameis Winston said about the Superdome, he loves going there. That was the first place he ever won as a pro, was the Superdome his rookie year. But Jameis Winston loves going to the Superdome. Kind of reminds him of his college days a little bit. He was kind of having fun at the press conference saying that some of his teammates never had big college games, so he doesn't know. They don't know what he's talking about. Bruce Arians said Saints fans never go away. Justin Thomas, you've been to a lot of Saints games. Is this the loudest place in the NFL? I know the measurements have Seattle louder and Kansas City, but I was there for the game against the Dallas Cowboys. It was one of the loudest Superdome games I've been at in a long time. Can you make a case more likely the Superdome is the toughest place in the NFL to play and could be the loudest?
I definitely think it's the loudest indoor stadium. It's got to be. It's probably, like you said, not the loudest. I believe Seattle and Kansas City usually trade off on that record, but I mean, just look at last year in the NFC Championship game. You could tell early on that Jared Goff was struggling to get the calls in. He couldn't hear them. They had some delay of games and had to take early timeouts. I mean, I think anytime, as long as the Saints are in the game and there's a chance for them to win, that crowd is really going to play a huge, huge factor. And I think because of that, a lot of teams know that going into the Superdome, it is one of the toughest places to play.
Roy Cummings, you've been to many, many, many NFL games and many, many NFL stadiums. Where would you more likely rank the Superdome?
I'm going to put it. I'm going to put it third or fourth on the list. It is. I think it is. I think the only place that is possibly louder is Seattle. I've been in Seattle. Now, things have to be going in Seattle's way for that to happen. But it's the same, I guess, in New Orleans. But I remember a game in Seattle, and the place was literally shaking. and that building was shaking. I haven't ever felt that in New Orleans, and I've been there, 24 times. But it's loud. It's very loud. It's one of those places where if you're down on the field, you literally can't hear what the person next to you is saying. So it's definitely, I think, the loudest. But in terms of being toughest to play, I think Seattle's tougher. I think Kansas City, when things are going right for Kansas City, is tougher. I think Green Bay is tougher. But it's certainly in the conversation. I don't think it's the toughest, but they're in the conversation. There's no doubt about it.
I will say, when they returned after Katrina for that game, it was the loudest stadium I've ever been in my life. I used to work in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and Auburn was the loudest before that one. I think every place kind of has its moment a little bit. But, yeah, I did a pregame show in Kansas City one time. It was so loud for a preseason game. It was like a college atmosphere. So I would put Kansas City and then Seattle and then the Superdome, but it's definitely up there. All right, guys, before we go, let's get predictions real quick. All of us were wrong last week. All of us actually Justin thought Rams 31-27. Roy thought Rams 28-21. And myself thought Rams 31-17. Justin, who do you have this week, and what's the score?
This is another tough one. I think the Bucs pull it off. I just think the Saints offense, even though they got all the weapons, they don't have Drew Brees. And Teddy Bridgewater, while he's a fine quarterback, he's a good game manager, he's not going to do anything special. And I think that's going to, in the end, be the reason why the Bucs win. I think they just have the more talented offense. And while the Saints defense keep them in the game, I think the Bucs pull it off. I think it's going to be a much lower scoring game than the Rams game. I think Bucs get, let's go with 31 and Saints 24.
Wow. How about that? All right, Roy Cummings, what do you think?
These Bucs-Saints games, like I said before, the Bucs have upset the Saints in New Orleans at times. They've knocked them out of the playoffs on occasion. They've dealt them some difficult blows. But look, this Buccaneers team, I think their offense is much better than the Saints' offense. But I think the Saints might have in fact, I'm almost certain that the Saints have the better defense. And you know what? I've seen this movie before. Where the Bucs do something special, and everybody starts to talk about them as if there may be something other than we thought they were, and then they disappoint you. Now there's
I feel a tide turning.
Yeah, well, look, I believe I said at the beginning of the season that I saw the Bucs as a 500 team, an 8-8 kind of team. That means they're going to win as many as they lose. So I think this is one where they give it back a little bit. I think they score a lot of points. I think they probably scored 28, maybe even 31 points, but I think they end up losing by a point or two, probably on a field goal late. I just think that games like this tend to bring out the best in Sean Payton, and I think he knows as well as anybody, any coach, how to derail that Bucs offense. So I believe this is a game where the Bucs take a bit of a step backwards. They score enough points to win, but still don't win. So I'm going to say 33-31 Saints.
Oh, my goodness. This is going to be history, because I cover the Saints and the Bucs. Justin's from New Orleans. Roy Cummings is usually, not I'm not saying you're Pollyanna. I like to kid you about that, but you're usually positive. I feel like this game is bigger for the Bucs than the Saints for a couple of reasons. I think the Saints, they're not going to say this. They're not going to, maybe even say it among teammates. But when Drew Brees went down, all of a sudden they're losing to the Rams. They have Seattle and the Cowboys back-to-back, and they're probably thinking, man, if we win one of those, we're okay. They go out and win both of them. And all of a sudden the Bucs have found themselves offensively. They have this breakout game in LA. I think the Bucs win this game for a couple reasons. One, I think it's bigger for them. And two, Teddy Bridgewater is Teddy Bridgewater. He's not gonna wow you. He's not gonna make the big mistake, but they need wow in New Orleans. They need wow in that offense, and Teddy Bridgewater isn't gonna give it to them. If the Saints didn't score a special teams touchdown and a defensive touchdown in Seattle, they wouldn't have won because Teddy Bridgewater didn't have the wow factor. He certainly didn't have it against Dallas. The defense stepped up for the Saints. If Jameis and Mike Evans and the offense get on a roll, Teddy Bridgewater can't keep up. The key, though, Jameis Winston, no pick sixes, and the defense has to improve a little bit from that LA Rams and the way they played the last couple of weeks. But you know what, guys? I like the Bucs 24-23, and I like Matt Gay to kick the game winner. Yeah, they're going to be down 23-21. Matt Gay's going to step up. He's going to kick the game winner, and I cannot wait to hear Bruce Arians' post-game speech after that one. What do you think, Roy Cummings?
Well, I just think that Sean Payton and the Saints look at this game. They always looked at this game as one that they were going to have. Now I think they look at it as one that they can't afford to let get away. They've got a lead in the division. They want to keep that lead. They want to do everything. They got to keep their foot down on the pedal here. I think they feel like they got away with one against Dallas. They can't let that happen again. They can't let one slip away here. I think they treat this like a playoff game, and I think they're going to go out and show the Bucs who's the elite team in this division is. They don't want to give the Bucs any breathing room. They know that right now they need to knock the Bucs back a step, and I think they're going to do it.
Well, we will find out Sunday in the Superdome. It's a 1:00 game between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the New Orleans Saints. Log on to pewterpirates.com. You can hear our podcast. You can check out all kinds of information we have on the Bucs and subscribe today. It's absolutely free. And in terms of our podcast, we're on all the platforms from iTunes to Podbean to Stitcher to Spotify to Google. The Bucs, a big one against the New Orleans Saints. They win that game. They take over first place in the NFC South. And all of a sudden that road trip or that road stretch doesn't look as bad for them as when they started against the two teams that were the best in the NFC a year ago. For our voice of reason producer, Justin Thomas, for our insider, Roy Cummings, I am merely Mike Nabors. Thanks for logging on, and we'll talk to you again next week. Enjoy the game, Bucs fans.